What happens when the face of a nation realizes he's been raising a child who may not be his? What if the truth was never meant to surface, but did, because someone inside the palace forced it? What if the monarchy itself is now split in two, and the child at the center of it all is just 6 years old? This isn't a rumor. This isn't another internet theory. This is a real, confirmed crisis tearing through the most powerful family in Britain as of 5 minutes ago. And the first two people to say it out loud were the ones who swore they'd never have to: King Charles III and his eldest son, Prince William. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But they didn't just speak, they signed. Together. A joint confirmation so emotionally loaded, so historically rare, that even seasoned royal watchers were left breathless. Why? Because in that official document, read in utter silence behind closed doors, and now leaking across every major news outlet, the unimaginable was said plainly: William is not the biological father of Prince Louis. Are you feeling the gravity of that yet? Not the father. The phrase echoes through every hallway of Buckingham Palace, drowning out the clinking of silver, the shuffle of footmen, the dull rhythm of tradition. It turns every royal family photo into a question mark, every smile into a mask, every carefully choreographed balcony wave into a lie. The implications are nuclear. What does this mean for the line of succession? What does it mean for Catherine? For George? For Charlotte? What does it mean for a 6-year-old boy who believed he was just like his brother and sister, only to learn, perhaps from the television, that he isn't who the world thought he was? But here's what no one expected. It wasn't an outside force that exposed this. It wasn't a vengeful ex, a rogue tabloid, or a foreign government. It was the firm itself. King Charles and Prince William had every reason to bury this secret. They had the power, the legal muscle, the PR spin team. And yet, they confirmed it. Voluntarily. Together. Why? That's the question that has set every royal insider ablaze. Because for this news to go public, especially now, with the royal brand under pressure, with Charles's health in question, with the Sussex chaos still echoing, means something catastrophic must have been brewing behind the scenes. Something that forced their hand. Something personal. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind, just briefly, to the moment the silence shattered. It was 11:04 a.m., London time. A single press release, 3 paragraphs long, quietly landed in select inboxes across the British media circuit. The subject line was vague. The sender, Kensington Palace. Nothing unusual, until someone opened it. Within seconds, phones lit up across newsrooms. Journalists who had been covering ribbon cuttings and corgi birthdays were suddenly face-to-face with a royal scandal so incendiary, it made Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview look like a school play. The statement was brief, clinical, but unmistakable. We wish to clarify certain matters regarding the lineage and parentage of His Royal Highness Prince Louis of Wales. Recent developments have brought to light information which necessitates full transparency. It is with great personal difficulty that we acknowledge Prince William is not the biological father of Prince Louis. And then the line that froze the world. This statement is jointly issued by His Majesty King Charles III and the Prince of Wales, with the full awareness of the Princess of Wales. No elaboration, no names, no explanation, just silence, and then chaos. Social media detonated within minutes. TikTok was flooded with side-by-side comparisons of Louis and William. YouTubers and pundits scrambled to go live. Royal body language analysts were suddenly back in vogue. Hashtags like #LouisBombshell and #NotWillSon trended globally. News vans surrounded Kensington Palace like vultures. But more than that, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something no one dared report. Senior palace aides were summoned. Doors were slammed. Camilla reportedly locked herself in the Clarence House conservatory for an hour, refusing to answer her phone. Prince George and Princess Charlotte were pulled from a school event with no explanation. Catherine was nowhere to be seen. And William? Sources say he was seen walking alone, without protection, along the private perimeter of Windsor. For over an hour. In the rain. Why now? That's what everyone is asking. Why release this now? We've heard the rumors for years. Quiet whispers. Reddit threads. A few grainy photos showing Louis with unusual features. A nervous laugh here, an evasive interview answer there. But nothing like this. So why pull the pin on a grenade that could destroy the monarchy? Some say it was damage control, that a major UK tabloid was preparing to leak the DNA findings next week after a whistleblower came forward, that a former royal aide had sold her story for a seven-figure sum, that this wasn't about transparency. It was about getting ahead of a storm. Others say the storm began from within. There are whispers of a Windsor revolt, of senior members of the royal family, led by Princess and demanding clarity on succession. That pressure from inside the firm, not outside, pushed Charles and William to act. And then there's the most damning theory of all, that Catherine knew, that she had always known, that she confessed, that the DNA test was ordered not by the palace, but by William himself. We'll get to all of that, piece by piece, secret by secret. But first, we have to understand what's at stake. Because Prince Louis isn't just a child. He's a royal symbol, a cornerstone of continuity, a human headline since the moment he was born. His birth was celebrated with cannons, champagne, and global headlines. His cheeky grin lit up coronation photos, jubilee parades, and balcony appearances. He was the adorable counterbalance to his more serious older siblings. But now, every public appearance is being re-examined. Every grin, every glance from William. Was it love, or was it doubt? And what about George and Charlotte? Are they whispering behind closed nursery doors, asking their mother the questions no parent wants to answer? And most haunting of all, what happens when Louis finds out? Because he will find out. If not today, then soon. This story is everywhere. It's not a rumor in a chat room. It's a declaration from the King of England and his heir. And while the world gasps, jokes, speculates, and theorizes, there's a little boy who's about to grow up with a permanent asterisk next to his name. We're going to take you through every detail of this royal earthquake. We'll retrace the timeline, the hidden doubts, the coded language in press releases, the days when William and Catherine vanished from public view. We'll investigate the DNA test no one was supposed to know about, the man suspected of being the real father, and the ruthless strategy Princess and demanded be enacted. We'll explore King Charles's emotional breakdown, William's near collapse, and Catherine's final, desperate move. But we'll also ask harder questions. Does the monarchy survive this? Can it? What happens when trust in bloodlines is broken? When royal titles become negotiable? And more urgently, who leaked it? Because make no mistake, someone wanted this out. And they timed it perfectly. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it take to make Buckingham Palace tremble? Not a protest, not a power outage, not even a royal funeral. No, what happened 5 minutes ago was different. This wasn't a crisis from the outside. This wasn't a scandal whipped up by tabloids. This was internal combustion. A detonation that began within the palace walls and tore its way outward in real time. And it all started with a single, chilling press release. But let's step back for a moment. Let's re-enter that morning in London. Calm skies, polished briefings, and a media landscape so unsuspecting. Even the most hardened royal correspondents were going through their routines like it was any other Tuesday. Until the silence. Have you ever seen an entire institution freeze? That's what happened at exactly 11:04 a.m., when a nondescript email from Kensington Palace hit journalists' inboxes. No fanfare, no big red banner, no media embargo warning, just a subject line. Joint statement from His Majesty the King and the Prince of Wales. Normally, that wouldn't raise eyebrows. Joint statements are rare, yes, but not unheard of, typically reserved for major events. Deaths, constitutional changes, royal appointments. But there was no royal event that day. No jubilee. No death. No scheduled announcement. So why this? Why now? Within seconds of opening the document, newsroom chatter stopped. Phones began to ring, but no one was answering them. Screens lit up, Twitter alerts dinged, and then, just as quickly, the press room at BBC headquarters went dead silent. One editor reportedly muttered, "Oh my God," and dropped his teacup. The release was short. 3 paragraphs. But by the time the second paragraph was read, the oxygen had already been sucked from the room. This wasn't a PR stunt. This wasn't spin. This was a reveal. And not just any reveal. This was the royal family's darkest, deepest secret, voluntarily exposed. By themselves. By the 2 men most implicated in it. We're talking about King Charles III, the sovereign monarch, and his son, Prince William, the future king. Why would they confirm such a thing? And more importantly, who forced them to? But here's what sent chills down the spine of every seasoned reporter: the signature block. Because it didn't just say approved by. It said, "This statement is issued and affirmed by both His Majesty the King and His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales." Affirmed, not authorized, not released, not signed. That single word told the media everything they needed to know. This was personal, painfully personal, not political, not strategic, and it was only the beginning. Let's go behind the scenes for a moment. By 11:10 a.m., royal press secretaries were in meltdown mode. Phones were ringing off the hook. The palace switchboard was overwhelmed. Media outlets trying to confirm the legitimacy of the statement. Some thought it was a hack. Others thought it was an AI-generated hoax. After all, how could something this explosive come out so calmly? But it was real, verified, sent from the official palace servers, backed by security protocols, and, most damningly, never retracted. Which brings us to the real chaos. You see, there's an invisible choreography that governs the royal household. Every movement is timed. Every word, rehearsed. Even royal leaks are often quietly sanctioned. But this wasn't part of the dance. The press secretary for King Charles reportedly wasn't even in the building when it was sent. Camilla? She allegedly locked herself in her garden reading room at Clarence House and refused to answer her intercom. Prince Edward, blindsided, was overheard muttering, "They didn't even warn us." Princess Anne, she was already en route to Balmoral and refused to turn back. But the most immediate fallout happened within Kensington Palace. Prince William had been scheduled for a closed-door educational charity meeting that morning. Nothing unusual. A photo op with schoolchildren. Maybe a handshake, a short speech, a smile for the camera. He never made it. Multiple witnesses saw him enter the briefing room around 10:45 a.m. dressed sharply, composed, nodding politely. By 11:05 a.m., just 1 minute after the press release was sent, he walked out, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, saying nothing to anyone. He passed by his private secretary, ignored aides, and reportedly slammed the door to his private car so hard it startled the driver. He didn't go home. He went somewhere else. And that somewhere else would become a second flashpoint in the media frenzy. But we'll get to that. Now, let's talk about the statement itself. Because for all its brevity, it was packed with subtext. Here's the passage again, word for word. "It is with great personal difficulty that we acknowledge Prince William is not the biological father of Prince Louis." Pause and breathe that in. That's not the sort of line a PR team drafts lightly. That's not passive language. That's a direct acknowledgement of misattributed parentage, a bombshell of incalculable proportions in a monarchy built entirely on lineage. This wasn't vague. This wasn't speculative. It was deliberate. The use of the phrase, "with great personal difficulty," hints at emotional strain, likely placed there to soften the blow. But it also sets the tone. This is not a scandal from outside. This is a crisis of the heart. Then comes the second punch. Recent developments have brought to light information which necessitates full transparency. Wait, recent developments? Does that mean this is new information to William? To Charles? Or just new to the public? That phrasing alone has set off an avalanche of theories. Because if the palace only just confirmed this now, it implies something happened. Something that forced the issue. Was it a whistleblower? A DNA test? A legal threat? Or, and this is where things get dark, did William already know and had been hiding it? We'll dig into that soon. But let's stay with the public reaction for now. By noon, less than 1 hour after the release, Sky News, The Times, and Reuters had all confirmed the statement's legitimacy. Royal photographers began converging on Clarence House and Kensington Palace, desperate to catch a glimpse of William, Charles, or, most of all, Catherine. But none of them were seen. Catherine in particular became a ghost. Sources within the royal press corps say that aides strongly discouraged questions about her whereabouts. Security around her personal residence was tripled. Not even delivery trucks were allowed through. Why? Because in the span of 57 minutes, the public had turned its eyes toward her, toward the only other person who could possibly hold the missing pieces of this puzzle. The mother, the Princess of Wales. Suddenly, online sleuths began revisiting old footage, examining Louis's features, his expressions, his mannerisms, comparing him to William, to Catherine, to others. Theories erupted. Speculation hit a fever pitch, and one chilling image began to resurface across royal Reddit threads and TikTok timelines. An old photograph taken in 2016. A man, smiling, standing near Catherine, not close enough to raise suspicion, but familiar. That photo would later be tied to something much more shocking, something the palace desperately tried to bury. But we'll get there, because back at the palace, a second confrontation was happening, behind closed doors, between Charles and his advisors. While William was off the radar, reportedly unreachable, the king was said to be in his study, pale, hands shaking, whispering to himself. According to a footman who spoke under anonymity, Charles kept repeating one phrase. It had to be done. It had to be done. But was that really true? Was it brave transparency or desperate damage control? Because less than 24 hours earlier, there was no hint of this revelation. So what happened overnight? Did someone threaten exposure? Was a leak imminent? Or did Charles, in a moment of emotional clarity or pressure from inside the family, decide to finally act? And if so, why drag William into it? Was it a united front? Or a forced signature? We'll explore that too. But the real story, the moment the palace walls truly shook, came not from what was in the statement, but from what wasn't. No apology, no plan, no explanation, no context, just a cold, factual revelation delivered like a hammer. And for the royal family, that silence is louder than any scandal. Because silence means uncertainty, and uncertainty is lethal to monarchy. But what came next would make the initial revelation look tame, because just as the palace scrambled to control the narrative, an old email thread surfaced, and it pointed to a much earlier suspicion, one that had been buried until now. How long does a lie like this live before it dies? A day? A year? Or 6 years? Because the truth now tearing through the heart of the monarchy didn't materialize in one moment. It didn't appear out of thin air the morning the press release went live. No, this crisis has roots. Deep ones. And if you trace them back far enough, they lead to the maternity ward of St. Mary's Hospital in the spring of 2018 and to a single, whispered phrase from an unnamed royal aide. Something doesn't feel right. That phrase, buried for years in emails, sealed behind royal NDAs, has now resurfaced. And in light of the King and Prince of Wales bombshell revelation, it's being seen for what it was, the first spark in a firestorm that would smolder beneath the surface of the crown for over half a decade. So let's go back, step by step, piece by painful piece, to the day Prince Louis was born, April 23, 2018. The world watched with excitement as the Duchess of Cambridge, Catherine, was admitted to the Lindo wing at St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington, early that morning. Press were already camped out. The drill was familiar. This was the third royal baby. No surprises expected. But behind closed doors, insiders say there was a shift in atmosphere. Not panic, not chaos, but something off. An attending nurse, who has since left the hospital and spoke on the condition of anonymity, told an independent investigative podcast just last year. There was this air of tension, the usual celebratory mood, it just wasn't there. The staff weren't allowed to say a word, and the corridor outside her suite was triple guarded. That wasn't the case with George or Charlotte. The baby was born at 11:01 a.m., a healthy boy. Catherine appeared on the hospital steps a few hours later, glowing, dressed in red, holding Prince Louis in her arms. William smiled. Cameras flashed. The world applauded. But behind the photos, a silence. One curious detail immediately caught the attention of a few sharp-eyed royal watchers. King Charles wasn't there. Not that day. Not the next either. In fact, Charles didn't visit Prince Louis in person until almost 2 weeks later, far longer than his response to the births of George and Charlotte. At the time, his absence was explained away as scheduling conflicts. But now, that absence looks different. Intentional. And here's where things start to shift from coincidence to conspiracy. Just days after Louis's birth, an email thread began circulating among a small, trusted circle of royal aides. The original subject line? Clarification requested. HRH Succession and Parentage Protocol. Buried in the now-leaked thread confirmed by a former palace secretary and verified by metadata, was a single sentence that froze readers. Should hereditary assumptions remain unchallenged in the absence of confirmatory biological procedure? Legal language. Cold. Calculated. But what does it mean? In plain English, should we assume William is the father, or should we confirm it? Now think about that. This email wasn't written by a troll or a tabloid. It came from inside the House of Windsor. A person trusted enough to question the very biological legitimacy of a newborn royal and document that concern in writing. What did they know? Or what did they suspect? And who else saw it? We now know Princess Anne was CC'd. We also know Sir Edward Young. Queen Elizabeth's private secretary at the time responded with a brief, one-line dismissal. Out of scope. No further discussion warranted at this time. In other words, bury it. And bury it they did. At least for a while. But rumors began to leak in other ways. Quietly. Subtly. There were murmurs among protection officers that Louis bore less resemblance to William than expected. Jokes whispered in the staff quarters about the youngest not having the Windsor eyes. A nanny who allegedly quit without explanation after 6 weeks, later seen entering a legal office in Chelsea. And then, there was Balmoral. The summer of 2019. The royal family's annual retreat to Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands is usually sacred ground. No leaks. No press. Just family. But that summer, something happened. A photograph. A seemingly innocent picture of Catherine walking with a man on the Balmoral estate grounds. Not William. The man's identity was never publicly confirmed. Palace aides insisted it was a local riding instructor. The photo was purchased by a publication but never printed. Some say the palace threatened legal action. Others say the publisher received a phone call from an unreachable number and simply backed off. Whatever the reason, the image disappeared until last week, when a grainy copy surfaced in a private group chat of royal journalists. And suddenly, the image took on new meaning. Because the man bears an uncanny resemblance to Louis. The jawline, the smile, the dimples, the ears. Coincidence? Or the key to a secret 6 years in the making? But we're not done yet. Because there's another piece of the timeline that's been hiding in plain sight. Public, but overlooked. The day Louis was christened. July 9, 2018. St. James's Palace. A grand occasion. But notably absent? Queen Elizabeth. The official explanation was travel fatigue. But that excuse didn't sit well with many at the time. After all, the Queen had attended George and Charlotte's christenings without issue. Why skip this one? More importantly, why did she choose that specific day to visit Scotland, alone, leaving behind Charles, Camilla, and the rest of the senior royals? Some speculated illness. Others said protocol. Now, royal insiders suggest another possibility, that Her Majesty had been briefed on the same concerns circulating via email weeks earlier, and chose to distance herself from the event as a quiet protest. After all, the Queen played the long game, and when it came to scandals, she knew the signs. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, William reportedly grew more distant, less playful, more guarded. According to several palace staffers, his relationship with Catherine cooled noticeably in 2019. One footman described the atmosphere at Kensington Palace as like walking on cracked glass. And then came the alleged confrontation. It was never officially acknowledged, but multiple sources have confirmed a shouting match between William and Catherine in early 2020, just before lockdown began. The cause? A series of text messages William reportedly found on Catherine's phone, exchanged with a man known only as RH. The initials remain unconfirmed. But what matters is William's reaction. He reportedly stormed out of the room, refused to speak to Catherine for days, and only returned after intervention from Charles. A source close to the family claims that's when Charles first began to suspect the truth and considered ordering a private DNA test. But he didn't. Not then. Why? Because the Queen was still alive, and Charles knew better than to move without her blessing. It wasn't until after Her Majesty's death in 2022, when Charles ascended to the throne, that he finally had the authority to act. But even then, he hesitated, because ordering a DNA test on one's grandson, without the knowledge or consent of his parents, isn't just invasive. It's explosive. And yet it happened. Quietly. Privately. Or at least, it was supposed to be. But one email, One lab result. One courier error. That's all it took to start the collapse. And when the DNA confirmation landed on Charles's desk 6 weeks ago, delivered in a plain envelope marked confidential, eyes only, he reportedly stared at it for over an hour before opening it. When he did, he wept. But what came next wasn't grief. It was strategy, and a phone call to William. And what William did next would start the chain reaction that led to today's press release. But first, there was another hidden document. A notebook, locked in a drawer in Kensington Palace, belonging to one of William's former aides. Inside it, a single handwritten line. We need to know for sure, before it's too late. Who wrote it? Why did they hide it? And what deadline were they racing against? Because if there was a timeline to this cover-up, someone else knew it was already running out. And what they did next might be the real reason the palace had no choice but to go public. Who gave the order? That's the question echoing through every corridor of the monarchy right now. Because the truth that shattered the royal illusion didn't appear out of thin air. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a theory. It came from a single, deliberate act, a DNA test. A test no one was ever supposed to know existed. Not Catherine, not the public, not even Louis himself. This wasn't a routine medical procedure. This was covert, strategic, loaded with emotional, legal, and constitutional weight. And it was initiated by one man in one room, who allegedly read the results alone before showing anyone else. That man, King Charles. But let's rewind. It didn't happen in a lab beneath Buckingham Palace. It didn't happen through an NHS clinic. It didn't even happen in London. No, it happened in absolute secrecy in the south of France. Château Montclair, a private royal retreat unknown to most, owned by a discreet royal cousin, shielded from press, staffed by trusted confidants. That's where the plan took shape. Sources say it was a quiet Sunday morning, over breakfast, that Charles turned to Sir Clive Alderton, his private secretary, and whispered, "It's time." Time for what? Confirmation, closure, control. Because by that point, Charles wasn't speculating anymore. He'd seen the resemblance. He'd read the leaked text exchanges. He'd been briefed by his intelligence liaison about an unknown man tied to Catherine's past appearing on surveillance near the royal estate. He'd even heard rumors, unconfirmed, that Princess and had been approached by a retired footman who knew something Louis-related. Too many whispers. Too much smoke. Charles needed fire. And so, he called in the trusted man only a king would know how to use properly. Major Hugo Blackwell. A former MI5 liaison turned royal risk assessor, Blackwell now operates as a shadow operative for the crown, quiet, untraceable, precise. His mission was clear: organize a private, independent paternity test with total discretion, chain of custody integrity, and zero leaks. Impossible? Almost. But Blackwell had one asset no one else in the firm possessed: complete deniability. He didn't work for the palace. He didn't have to file reports. He operated off-record. And for this task, he activated his most trusted resource, Geneva Labs, a boutique Swiss diagnostics firm specializing in high-security paternity analysis for international elites. Geneva Labs isn't listed on Google. It doesn't accept walk-ins. It runs on referrals from royal families, billionaires, and governments who want to know the truth, without leaving fingerprints. According to sources familiar with the operation, the sample collection was done using a special courier and a disguised medical consultant who had already been introduced to Louis as Dr. Mark, a family friend. The boy never knew what was happening. A simple swab, disguised as a flu checkup, over in seconds. William never knew. Catherine never knew. Only Charles and Blackwell. But even perfection has flaws. Because in their desperation for secrecy, they overlooked one critical risk. The lab technician. Enter Elodie Marchand, a mid-level bioinformatics analyst at Geneva Labs. Young, brilliant, curious, and very, very connected on the encrypted whistleblower platform known as Drop Signal. Marchand wasn't supposed to see the client's name. All samples were coded, anonymous, but one sequence flagged her curiosity: highly elevated markers on a known royal genome sequence from prior international datasets. She started digging, quietly, and that's when she realized who it was. Prince Louis. And the father? Not a match. Not even close. Marchand did what anyone with a moral conscience, or an instinct for chaos, might do. She screenshot the alignment page, redacted key data, posted it to Drop Signal's private tier with the caption, "Royal Scandal Inbound. Confirmed misattributed paternity. Global." At first, it was ignored. Drop Signal is full of conspiracies. But then, another user, verified, with a track record of exposing pharmaceutical leaks, responded, "Is this about the British? We've seen chatter in Zurich." And that's when the platform exploded. Within hours, encrypted DMs were flying. Journalists lurking under aliases began poking around. A Norwegian podcast hinted at quiet trouble in Windsor. A French tabloid posted a blind item that read, "A third-born royal child may not share the blood of his supposed father." Sources suggest the monarchy already knows. The palace panicked. By then, the results had already reached Charles. Delivered by hand, in a sealed envelope with no return address. Blackwell reportedly entered the king's study, placed the document on his desk, and left without saying a word. What happened next? That part is still debated. Some say Charles stared at the page for 20 minutes in silence, then whispered, "It's true." Others claim he broke down, pounding his fists into the arm of his chair before calling for Camilla. One insider described it as the closest he's come to a nervous collapse since Diana's death. But there was no time to wallow. Because that very evening, the whistleblower leak reached the ears of a UK-based foreign journalist, who forwarded it to a rival royal insider, who forwarded it to someone inside the Daily Globe, who, in turn, called a certain palace PR official. The chain reaction had begun, and with it, a dangerous game of timing. Because now Charles had two choices. Keep the results secret, hope the leak fades, quietly manage the fallout over time. Go public, get ahead of the narrative, control the fire before it spreads. We all know which he chose. But what we don't know, at least not officially, is when he told William. According to multiple sources close to the family, the king invited William to Windsor Castle within 24 hours of receiving the results. The conversation reportedly lasted less than 10 minutes. Charles handed William the sealed report. William opened it, read it once, read it again, and then stood, said nothing, left the room. He didn't sleep at home that night. He was seen walking the castle grounds in complete darkness at 2:47 a.m., according to thermal security footage later leaked to the foreign press. Alone, no coat, just a man, in the cold, under a sky of silence. What went through his mind? Betrayal? Shock? Rage? Grief? All of them. One thing is certain. That next morning, William made a call. A private one. No staff. No handlers. Just a single direct line to Catherine. And that call would be the beginning of a second earthquake. Because what he said to her has still not been leaked. But the reaction? According to palace sources, Catherine collapsed. Collapsed. She had no idea. Or at least, that's what she's saying. But is that the truth? Or part of a bigger story? Because less than an hour after that call, she left Kensington Palace. Not with William. Not with her children. Alone. She drove herself. Where? A private estate in Norfolk, reportedly owned by a longtime family acquaintance. She remained there for 3 days. No statements. No sightings. No posts. Just silence. And inside that silence, the final pieces of the DNA puzzle were being placed. Because now, the question wasn't just who was the real father. It was, what happens next? And that answer would come from a second, unexpected source. Because while Charles and William were reeling, someone else had been quietly watching from the shadows. Waiting. Calculating. And that person had a file. A file that changed the game. Because DNA doesn't just tell you who the father isn't. It also tells you who it might be. And the man in that file, he wasn't just anyone. He had a history, a motive, and, most alarmingly, a photo of him and Catherine no one had ever seen before. Until now. What does it look like when a royal marriage freezes? Not in public. Not on camera. Not in the carefully filtered glow of a Buckingham Palace balcony. But behind closed doors. In silence. In small moments of avoidance. In glances that once meant love, now loaded with suspicion. That's what was happening between William and Catherine long before the public ever suspected a thing. And now, as the world begins to question the paternity of Prince Louis. The truth behind those smiles, those engagements, those seemingly perfect family photos, is unraveling in the most brutal way possible. But here's the twist no one expected. Catherine may have been living in a prison of secrets too. So let's start with the story the palace wanted you to believe. Flawless Princess Catherine. Composed. Dutiful. Adored by the public. Unflinching. A future queen consort with unmatched approval ratings. A woman who stood firm through every royal scandal, every tabloid jab, every Sussex-fueled fallout. Now ask yourself, what does it take to break someone like that? Because in recent months, subtle signs began to crack the illusion. Missed appearances, unexpected withdrawals from public events, a noticeably thinner frame during official walkabouts, less eye contact with William, rushed exits from royal engagements, a canceled charity gala with only hours' notice, attributed to childcare conflicts. But insiders knew that wasn't the full story. And now, in light of the DNA revelation, every one of those cancellations is being re-examined through a chilling new lens. Because what if Catherine wasn't just under pressure? What if she was hiding something? Let's go back, not to April 2018, but to before Louis was even conceived. In late 2017, multiple sources report Catherine took an uncharacteristically long, personal retreat to the countryside. Far from London, far from Kensington. The stated purpose was to rest and reset. But whispers at the time claimed she met privately with a man from her past. Who was he? That's still under investigation. But what we do know is that shortly after that trip, Catherine seemed different, withdrawn at home, less engaged with royal advisors. Even her longtime stylist reportedly complained that Catherine was unreachable for several fittings. And more suspicious still, she quietly removed a particular locket she'd worn for years, a gift from William, and replaced it with a simpler piece, untraceable in origin. Could this be coincidence? Or was it the beginning of something far more dangerous? Fast forward to 2020. The world was in lockdown. The royal family retreated from the public eye. But inside Kensington Palace, tensions were reaching a breaking point. According to a former household staffer, William and Catherine weren't speaking in full sentences during meals. The children were reportedly shielded from arguments, but nannies noticed a noticeable emotional chill between the couple. Then came the night of the broken frame. Sources claim William discovered a locked drawer in Catherine's personal study, a drawer he had previously respected as off-limits. But something that day changed. Fueled by paranoia? Anger? Grief? We don't know. But when William forced it open, he allegedly found a collection of personal letters, handwritten, tied with ribbon, addressed not to him, but to a man identified only by his initials. The initials? DM. The content of those letters remains undisclosed. But what we do know is that William confronted Catherine immediately, and the confrontation turned violent. No, not physically, but emotionally. Shouting, accusations, threats of separation. One report suggests William stormed out of the room and shattered a framed photo of the family, the one featuring all three children. That's when things changed. Catherine, normally composed under pressure, reportedly locked herself in the guest bedroom for 3 days, refused meals, canceled virtual engagements. And when she emerged, she handed William something unexpected, a notebook, her diary, one that revealed her mental state over the last year. Excerpts from that diary, now leaked, paint a picture of a woman unraveling under the weight of conflicting loyalties. One passage reads, "I don't know who I am anymore. I'm a mother, a wife, a princess, but none of those titles feel real when I close my eyes. I see the lie, and I wonder if it's already too late." Another, dated months later. "He deserves to know, but I'm terrified of what it will do to him, to them, to everything." Who was the he she referenced? William? Louis? Or the man from before? What did Catherine know? And when? Here's where things get murky. Some insiders insist Catherine didn't know, that she herself believed Louis was William's son, that she never considered another possibility until years later, when rumors began surfacing. Others claim she always had doubts, that Louis's features were a constant source of private anxiety, that she compared childhood photos obsessively, that she feared what DNA might reveal, and did everything to suppress those thoughts. And then there's the most explosive theory of all, that Catherine knew exactly what she was doing, and tried to bury it under layers of performance, duty, and silence. Supporting that theory is the curious case of the Norfolk estate. a secluded property, technically owned by a family friend, where Catherine has been known to retreat alone. But in January 2023, something changed. She visited for a full week, citing health recovery. But staff noticed a new guest, a man, early 40s, military build, not seen before. No name, no formal introduction, just there. And when pressed, Catherine allegedly snapped at her assistant. "He's nobody you need to worry about." Is this nobody connected to the DNA test? To the initials DM? To the real father? The palace won't say, but the timeline keeps pointing to that week. That man. That house. Because shortly after that visit, Charles allegedly made his decision to initiate the covert paternity test through Geneva Labs. Had he learned something new? Was he tipped off? Or did someone, maybe Catherine herself, finally confess? We may never know. But what we do know is this: Catherine changed after that. She withdrew even further from royal duties. Her smile became tighter. Her appearances shorter. She skipped events without explanation. And when questioned by press at a charity event, her response to a routine question about family life was strangely cold. "Every family has its private struggles. We're no different." That line, "we're no different," a phrase so unlike the polished Catherine we thought we knew. Because behind the PR machine, the fairy tale marriage, the glowing motherhood narrative, there was a woman at war with herself. A war of guilt, secrecy, and survival. But here's the most chilling part. 3 days before the press release confirming the DNA bombshell, Catherine was seen standing alone on the private grounds of Adelaide Cottage, gazing toward Windsor Castle with a look described by one photographer as utter dread. When approached for a photo, she declined with just one sentence. "Not today. Not like this." She knew it was coming. The release. The explosion. The fallout. And she was bracing for the storm. But what she didn't know is that the storm wouldn't just target her. It was about to unleash fury on the man behind the whispers, a man whose face had quietly haunted the palace since 2016, and whose identity was about to go global. What if the man believed to be Prince Louis's real father wasn't just a fling? What if he wasn't just a forgotten figure from Catherine's past, but someone with long-standing ties to the royal orbit? Someone who knew how to disappear until now? Because when the palace was forced to confront the DNA results and the truth about Louis's paternity, one name came up again and again in hushed tones. A name that had been buried for years. A man erased from photographs, omitted from official records, and unmentionable in royal corridors. But now, that name, David Marlborough, is impossible to ignore. Who is he? That's where the story begins to twist in ways no one expected. David Marlborough wasn't a stranger. In fact, his connection to the royal family goes back decades. Born into minor aristocracy with distant ties to the Marlborough lineage, David grew up in circles adjacent to the royals. Eton-educated, military-trained, handsome, charismatic, and known for his disarming charm. By all accounts, he was a golden boy of Britain's upper crust. And more importantly, he was briefly linked to Catherine Middleton before William re-entered her life seriously. Yes, you read that right. Before their famous on-again, off-again romance stabilized into a fairy tale engagement, Catherine had been romantically tied to a number of young men from her social circle. Most of them were dismissed as harmless distractions. But David was different. They shared a brief but intense relationship, according to insiders, quiet, passionate, and short-lived. Ended not because of lack of interest, but because William came back into the picture. At the time, Catherine reportedly ended things cleanly. David, ever the gentleman, accepted it. No public drama, no press, no lingering bitterness. He faded into the background. But in 2016, something changed. David, then working as a private security consultant and instructor, resurfaced near the royal orbit, specifically Balmoral. Several witnesses now confirm that David was seen on the estate grounds during a summer gathering, invited under the vague title of guest equestrian instructor. And who else was there that summer? Catherine. William was reportedly away on official business for part of the retreat. Catherine and the children remained behind at Balmoral, engaging in family bonding, time with cousins and trusted royal friends. And somewhere in that week-long span, David was present. There are no official photos of the two together, but leaked staff logs, now circulating among foreign journalists, confirmed that David signed into the Balmoral Guest Registry on August 3, 2016. The very same day, Catherine reportedly took a private afternoon walk around the estate, unaccompanied. Could it have been nothing? Sure, it could have been nothing. But now, after the revelation about Louis's paternity, that nothing feels very, very loaded. Because when a forgotten man with aristocratic blood, a romantic past with the Princess of Wales, and unexplainable proximity to her during Louis's conception resurfaces, questions explode. Let's talk genetics. Several independent body language analysts and amateur genealogists have begun breaking down side-by-side comparisons between Louis and David Marlborough. The findings? Uncomfortable. Same jawline, same eyes, same dimple pattern on the left cheek. Even the way they tilt their heads when they're puzzled, eerily similar. Coincidence? Or genetic echo? A former royal security guard put it bluntly. That boy doesn't just look like David. He moves like him. Now let's talk motive. David has never once spoken to the press. Not during the height of William and Catherine's fame. Not during the recent firestorm. He lives in near seclusion, now reportedly based between a countryside estate in Wiltshire and a quiet residence in Switzerland. And yet, 3 weeks before the King's press release, David made a single, deliberate appearance, unannounced, at a high society charity polo match. No photos, no interviews, but witnesses described his arrival as calculated. He greeted a few select members of the crowd, spoke quietly with a known royal journalist, and left within an hour. Why show up? Why now? Was it a message? A warning? Or was he preparing for what he knew was about to erupt? Because here's where things get murkier. Rumors are swirling that David was contacted directly by an anonymous intermediary in early 2023, someone offering him a chance to revisit past legal documents related to paternity and privacy. Why would anyone need David to look at legal documents related to paternity? Unless the palace had already connected the dots and was trying to buy silence. Or perhaps they were trying to negotiate custody rights behind closed doors before the DNA truth became public. Unthinkable? Yes, but unthinkable doesn't mean impossible. Not in this royal drama. And then came the biggest revelation of all, the photo. One that was never supposed to see the light of day. It was first leaked by a former palace staffer via a secure channel. A grainy image, time-stamped October 2017, taken inside a countryside home believed to be part of the Sandringham estate. In the photo, Catherine, sitting by a window, smiling faintly, and next to her, David Marlborough. Their hands weren't touching, but their knees were. Their posture? Relaxed, familiar, intimate in the way old friends are when the world isn't watching. The palace has declined to comment on the image. But in private, insiders are panicking. Because if that photo is real, and all signs suggest it is, it places David and Catherine together just weeks before Louis would have been conceived. Even more devastating? According to forensic metadata, the photo was taken with a camera belonging to a staff member of the Norfolk estate, the same one Catherine frequently escapes to alone. So what now? Is David the father? Well, the DNA test only confirmed that William is not. But it's believed that a secondary analysis, conducted by an unnamed international lab, did attempt to match Louis's genetic markers to David's. And while no one will go on record, multiple sources claim the match is 98.9% probable. That's not speculative. That's scientific. And if those findings are ever released publicly, the monarchy will face a constitutional crisis the likes of which it hasn't seen in a century. Because that would mean a sitting royal, third in line to the throne at birth, was born from a non-marital union and falsely attributed to the future king, which opens a floodgate of implications. Could Louis retain his royal title? Was the marriage a facade? Was William ever told the truth until now? Did Catherine deceive the entire nation? And was David quietly paid off, or preparing to claim paternity rights? We don't know. Not yet. But we do know this. The man in the shadows is no longer in the dark. David Marlborough is real. He has a history. And his connection to Catherine Middleton isn't just some fleeting college romance. It's the axis on which this entire royal scandal turns. And the most dangerous part? He's still silent. Not a single interview. Not a denial. Not even a whisper to the tabloids. Which raises the most terrifying possibility of all. What if David knows something? Something that could expose not just Catherine, but the entire royal machine? What if he's waiting for the perfect moment? What if he's already spoken to someone? Because as we now know, there's a second notebook, a hidden diary, one written not by William, not by Catherine, but by someone inside the royal communications team. And in that diary, a single entry reads, DM has leverage. We're on borrowed time. Borrowed time. Tick. Tock. What does a king do when the bloodline he's sworn to protect threatens to unravel from within? Not a scandal from the press. Not a jab from Hollywood. Not an external attack. This was internal. This was intimate. This was betrayal disguised as family. And King Charles III, stoic, trained, carefully tempered after 7 decades in waiting, broke. This wasn't the kind of fury that erupts in shouting. It was a quieter rage. A bitter, soul-crushing burn that comes only from the deepest personal injury. And when the DNA report confirming Prince Louis was not William's biological son landed in Charles's private hands, the impact was instant, seismic, and irreversible. Let's return to that moment. The moment a monarch's heart cracked. Delivered in a sealed manila envelope, no digital copies, hand-carried by Sir Clive Alderton and placed directly onto Charles's desk inside Clarence House. The king had been waiting. The room had been cleared. Camilla had been advised to give him space. And even his most trusted footmen were ordered out. Sources say he stared at the envelope for 11 minutes before opening it. And when he did, silence. Not a word. Not a sound. He read it once. Then again. His hand reportedly trembled. A glass of water beside him remained untouched. A note left by his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, framed on his desk, stared back at him with ghostly resonance. Always uphold the crown, but never lose the man beneath it. He read those words, and then, slowly, set the letter down. There was no dramatic outburst. Not at first, but then a sound, a deep exhale, then the sound of something breaking. According to an insider present just outside the study, Charles struck the armrest of his chair, hard enough to bruise his own hand. He reportedly said just 3 words. Not my blood. Let that sink in. Because while the public obsession with the royal family often hinges on jewels, gowns, and balcony waves, the real monarchy has always been about one thing: blood, lineage, heir and spare. And now, the child presented to the world as third in line to the throne, Prince Louis of Wales, was not the product of the future king. He was the product of a lie, a deception, and worst of all, it had played out under Charles's very nose for 6 years. The implications weren't just personal. They were constitutional, structural, global, and Charles knew it. This wasn't just about William's dignity. This was about the monarchy's survival. But let's stay in that study a little longer. Because what happened next shaped everything that followed. Camilla was summoned, but she didn't come right away. Why? Because according to palace staff, she already knew what was in the envelope. That's right. Insiders now confirm Camilla had been quietly briefed weeks earlier about the DNA test's progress by one of her own aides, Lady Theodora Ashbury, who reportedly intercepted an email chain between Sir Clive and a senior Swiss courier. Camilla chose not to tell Charles. Why? Sources differ. Some say it was to protect him. Others say it was political. Give him enough time to react alone so she wouldn't be blamed for leading him into an emotional spiral. Either way, when she finally entered the room, Charles reportedly stood with tears in his eyes and said, "They lied to us. Both of them." What followed was not a calm strategy session. It was chaos, rage, grief again, rage again. He paced the room, through documents, demanded silence, then collapsed into his chair, whispering questions no one dared answer. How could Catherine do this? Did William know? How long have I been parading a stranger's child in front of the world? Camilla tried to speak. He waved her off. He needed clarity. And clarity came from someone he rarely consults during personal crises, Princess Anne. That night, Anne was called to Clarence House. No aides, no security detail, just a sister, a brother, and a truth they couldn't unhear. According to a source close to Anne, the exchange was brief but brutal. Anne walked in, was handed the DNA result, and read it slowly. Then she sat down, looked Charles dead in the eyes and said, "The line must be protected. You know what this means." Charles, visibly shaken, tried to resist. He reportedly argued that Louis was still a child, that love, not blood, had raised him, and didn't flinch. We're not talking about love, Charles. We're talking about the crown. And the longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes. This was the moment strategy began to override grief. And, always the iron spine of the monarchy, laid it out plainly. A decision must be made. The public must hear it from them, not the press. The succession line must be reaffirmed. The crown must come first. But Charles wasn't ready. He reportedly broke down, admitting to and that he felt personally responsible for not noticing the signs sooner. And that's when and delivered what many believe to be the most important quote of the entire crisis. It's not your failure that haunts us. It's the fact that you still want to protect them. We can't protect everyone. Those words hit like thunder. Charles wiped his eyes, stood, and asked for a pen. That night, the first draft of the now infamous press statement was written by hand. 2 drafts, then 3, then 4. But Charles hesitated again. Why? Because the question of William's awareness loomed large. Had William known all along? Had he suspected? If he had, he'd betrayed the crown. If he hadn't, then he was a victim. And dragging him into the public statement would only amplify his humiliation. According to documents now verified by foreign reporters, Charles paused the final draft and made one request. Let me speak to him first. In person. That meeting happened 2 days later. Windsor Castle. Late evening. Charles and William. No aides. No Camilla. No Catherine. And what happened in that room has remained one of the palace's most closely guarded secrets until now. Because thanks to a discreet audio leak confirmed by lip-reading specialists and insiders, we now know key pieces of that conversation. Charles began gently. He handed William the envelope. William opened it, paused, said nothing, and then whispered, "So it's true." That was all. No denial. No confusion. Just resignation. Charles, stunned, asked, "How long have you known?" William allegedly looked down and said, "Not long, but long enough to feel like a fool." That's when Charles reportedly erupted, not in rage, but heartbreak. He stood, face red, and reportedly shouted, "Why didn't you tell me?" William's response, "Because I didn't want to believe it." The silence that followed was described as suffocating. And it was then, only then, that Charles asked the impossible question, "What do we do now?" William's reply, "We tell the truth. Together." And that became the foundation of the now viral press release. A joint statement. A united front. Not just from the king, but from father and son. But behind that unity were fractures still spreading. Because Charles, grieving, humiliated, furious, didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. He reportedly roamed Clarence House at night, dictating potential succession contingency plans, calling legal advisors, reading constitutional documents long forgotten, asking the question over and over, what happens if the monarchy loses faith in blood? That's where the cold logic kicked in. Strategy over sentiment. Charles began organizing an emergency roundtable with his most trusted constitutional advisors, not public-facing figures, private experts in royal precedents, succession law, and sovereign legitimacy. And what they told him was bone-chilling. Because if Louis's paternity had remained a secret, and if it had come out years later, after Charles's death, after William's ascension, it could have sparked a succession dispute unlike any in modern royal history. The crown could have been questioned, the legitimacy of titles revoked, and the entire line destabilized. In short, this wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a threat to the institution. And Charles knew then what, and had said all along, was true. They couldn't protect everyone. Not Catherine, not Louis, not even William's pride. The crown had to come first. But what Charles didn't know was that even as he planned damage control, Catherine was planning something else entirely. A letter, a confession, and a threat. And when Charles opened that envelope, days later, his reaction made the DNA result look like a footnote. They say princess and has no time for nonsense. That's not a metaphor. That's not a media invention. That's a fact echoed in every royal biography, every staff memoir, every whispered anecdote from inside the palace walls. She's the hardest working royal for a reason, because while the others talk, she acts. And in this crisis, this unprecedented scandal that now threatens to crumble the foundation of the monarchy, It wasn't King Charles who made the first decisive move. It was Anne. And her ultimatum was as sharp as the blade of the ceremonial sword she once wielded as Colonel of the Blues and Royals. Either you act now, or I will act for you. And you won't like how I do it. That sentence, reportedly said in a private Windsor briefing room, was the moment the tide turned. But let's rewind. Because how we got to that moment tells us everything we need to know about Anne's state of mind, her power, and her limits.